Honey, 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 wake up. Honey, wake up. There's a new Nicolas Cage movie out. There's a new Nicolas Cage movie out. Honey.
They're crawling up from underneath us. They'll break in any second. You need to trust me.
And today we have Arcadian. It's a creature feature, so brought a little Mogwai with me. Another Nicolas Cage movie, or you can call it a Cage movie if you want. It just so happens to be a movie that more or less stars / co-stars Nicolas Cage, but nowadays it's kind of really all you need to sell your movie, especially if it's a horror adjacent movie. Looking at you, color out of space. Arcadian is the newest film that unless I'm mistaken, is another Shudder original. What Netflix is to cinema in general, Shudder is to horror cinema and like the horror communities and all that. I brought up Shudder as recently as my coverage of Late Night with the Devil, which I loved, and even When Evil Lurks last year, which I also loved. Then I heard Arcadian was coming out, and it was Shudder and Nicolas Cage and that boy from the It remake, so I was down. Arcadian is directed by a Benjamin Brewer. This is his third feature-length film, though, fun fact, because I bring it up every chance that I get, the director of Arcadian did work on visual effects for Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of my favorite films ever, period. Like, this is perfection, more than perfection, in my not-so-humble opinion. I've already said his name a bunch of times, but of course, gotta go down the list. Arcadian does technically star, I always say this every time that his name comes up, I unironically love and appreciate and respect Nicolas Cage. Even if the movie that he's in is pure dog shit, I'm going to enjoy it purely for him. This man has never, and I doubt he will ever, turn in a poor or boring or uninspired performance. I'll get off my soapbox. See, Nicolas Cage is in this. Now, the two co-stars in this film, I mean, as always, there is a larger cast, but I'm going to go over just the three main people. We have Jaden Martell, who you might recognize from It, the remake It. He was Billy, old Bill, and the one I know I covered for sure, and what irony, because I recently brought this up when I was reviewing Sasquatch Sunset of all films, because of Riley Keough, and now, because of Jaden Martell, I once again bring up The Lodge, which I don't like, but technically, that's a connection on my channel. I reviewed that movie. He was also in that, so... And the other son is played by a Maxwell Jenkins, who I have not seen as much of the things that he's been in terms of film or television, but if I were to give him a shout out for anything, I think Netflix remake of Lost in Space, he played the Will Robinson. Arcadian, what's it about, you're wondering? Honestly, I saw the trailer and I was thinking to myself, oh, so it's like a Quiet Place ripoff? Yes and no. The concept of trying to survive on a farm out in the country in the way that an actual Arcadian would be, I mean, that's a similarity. This does, I think, have enough of its own original content to stand apart on its own. So no, it's not. At some point in the, what I can only assume is the relatively near future, something happened in the world, and now everybody goes out during the day, night comes, and it comes at night. And everybody just battens down the hatches, and they can hear scratching, knocking, something or some things are outside trying to get in. And they never really make it too apparent what it is. I think the end of the trailer kind of shows a blurry montage of what it could be, but that's the premise of the film, is this family of Nick Cage and his two sons trying to survive in the wilderness, and that's the film. Overall, I had a good time. This film does some things well and does some things not as well. It's a mixed bag for me. Out of the horror films that I've seen this year, it's one of the better ones, I would say. I've been sitting on it for a minute, but I don't love it. It's a decent creature feature, all things considered. I know that I reviewed Sting and Imaginary recently. Those are a couple ones I saw earlier this year. This one's definitely better than Imaginary. Is it better than Sting? Maybe. Other positives. Our main family performs well. There are more characters introduced in the film. I think you see them in the trailer, but they're not the only family surviving out here in the middle of nowhere. When it comes to Nick Cage and his sons, they do a good, if not great job overall. They're believable. They embody the characters well. I believe they're a family and they're just trying to survive. We have other characters that are introduced in the film. They're not bad. They're just They're all right. They're okay. I think the creature design, we do see more of the creatures as the film progresses. That's just usually how a creature feature functions, period. And I will admit, the design for this creature is unique to an extent. It's pretty unique. Its design, its anatomy, its initial visual aesthetic is unnerving. And then once it, how do I put this? Once it gets going, it's very, very unnerving. I've never quite seen a creature behave the way these creatures do in this movie, and it sets itself apart from other films of similar ilk. Major applause for that. I think that the anatomy and how the creature functions is cool, unique, creepy, pretty scary to an extent, and also it gets to a point where, let me just put it this way, if you've seen Critters, there's definitely a nod to the Critters franchise, which I low-key love. But that being said, with a cool creature design like this, you would think that it'd be prime real estate for practical effects, but I think they're mostly digital. I doubt there was a mocap involved in a film like this. I think some bits were practically done, but I think most of the film is digital, and it doesn't look bad, but I don't know, just there's some moments where you can tell where the budget needed to be versus where it ultimately ended up. I'm not mad about it, but yeah, the effects, definitely some very clear visual trickery throughout. But now we get into the cons of the film. Personally, don't think they nailed the family drama aspect of it. I was more willing to believe the family drama when it came to our core family. I still think some of it was a little bit contrived. I know they're kids, right? Like, they're not going to be straight shooters. They're not going to be thinking logically or with their brain all the time. They might think with their heart, or they just might not think at all. I do think some of the family drama felt a tiny bit manufactured and contrived, just a little bit. But what really got me was when it came to other people interacting with this family. It felt weak to me. I saw what they were going for, but relationships just didn't hit. I don't know if it's the actor's fault or not, just the writing. Maybe it's because it just lacked focus, and the drama was supposed to be a wedge, a divide in the family. Technically, it did accomplish its goal, but for me, it kind of took away from the creature feature survival horror aspect of it, and try to become like, I don't know, an episode of some CW drama instead. It didn't quite mix well for me. Also, a big theme for me, and I often find myself saying this in films like this that are especially horror. I love it when horror like world builds, or in this case more specifically lore builds. And I'm not saying you have to give me all the answers, but if you're gonna draw me in this world, give me a vague idea. Never confirm it, but just a vague idea of what happened. Sure, there's speculation, there's some ideas. In this case, we have a world that's torn apart by this epidemic of creatures, but we don't really quite know how they work. And then in terms of answers, I mean, I guess you kind of get answers, but prepare to not be fully informed is what I'm saying, I guess. Like, there's going to be some information gleaned, but not a whole hell of a lot. I would love to have seen and learned more is what I'm saying. Maybe not showing more is more effective, arguably, but my point stands. And then the direction. The first scene in this movie is a pretty good indication of what you're in for and what to expect as the film progresses. It's not like this through the entirety of it, but a lot of this film is freehand, very shaky camera work, and I get the point, right? It's supposed to be diegetic to the situation the main character's in, whether it's meant to destabilize you. You're meant to feel destabilized or disheveled or in a panic, or you're meant to be put into the same headspace or visual headspace as whoever's on screen, in this case our protagonists. But so much in this film, when it gets shaky, just becomes harder to see and understand what's happening in the scene. Not to mention, there are some scenes where, outdoors is fine for the most part, but especially when it gets dark and at night, I assume this is due to budget constraints, but there are some scenes, that are in interior rooms of a house or a barn, or especially like in this one section in a cave, and it's so claustrophobic and zoomed in and so vague with directions and where people are coming and going and where the threats are that I could never quite fully map it out in my head. And again, I'm assuming it was because of budget or just lack of proper storyboarding perhaps, or maybe it was meant to be that way, like you're meant to be lost like the characters are. sure, just didn't quite work for me. So I get it. I'm all up for the occasional shaky cam for like certain scenes in film and television, but you can communicate a tumultuous environment or event occurring without having to like shake the shit out of your camera. Overall, Arcadian could have been a lot worse. A few of us went to go see it. One of us thought it was okay. I thought it was pretty good. And if I recall, my other friend, he loved the movie. We had an argument later because I said I liked Civil War more than this, and he said he liked this more than Civil War. Two very different films, I understand. But I honestly think Arcadian is another fairly solid entry in the Shudder exclusive films that are out there. It's not one of my favorite Shudder original releases, but it's one that I'd be willing to watch again. I think it's unique enough where it kind of can stand on its own 2 feet as a solid creature feature. You don't have to see it in theaters, especially because like you're not going to be able to see much of anything once it starts getting all shaky. Pretty good with some really good moments. I would give Arcadian a high 3 out of 5. A high 3 out of 5. It is above average. It has just enough going for it where it stands above the usual suspects for me and kind of like carves out its own little spot there. Definitely not going to be top 10 for the year, but at the same time, I wouldn't advise against seeing it. If you're into this kind of a movie, definitely go see it. It's worth to at least give it one watch. That's all I got to say about Arcadian, though. Thank you guys and gals so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next episode of whatever movie I review that has Nicolas Cage in it. And goodbye, travelers.